not on the computer, so if we need to puck through the workbooks or the draft documents, we can pull them up locally and look through them. But he can guide us if we need to get to a particular place or we have a particular question. I didn't think we'd need to spend much time today on the workbooks. I think that's pretty well dressed up. He made the changes to some of the headings we needed on some of the graphs or some of the tables, so hopefully that you've all had a chance to take a look at those and seen the updates that he did, but all fairly minor updates, but add a lot to the actual documents. So what I'd hope to do today is kind of go through the executive summary we're working on and see what additions or deletions or edits that we want to try to make to that. So let's ask who has a copy and who doesn't. Put it that way. Do we need to just put it up on the screen?
Any extra copies?
The one up on the screen, Dennis, is your version, not the edited version that Roger did?
It should have the edits.
Oh, it does, okay,
Yeah.
good.
I'll see if I can't blow that.
And where's the easy place to tell me which one I have?
So if it's got the bars on the side, that shows you that there was an edit made there in the track changes mode.
Yeah, but mine doesn't show that.
If you have one that looks like that,
No,
okay, in that case, you probably don't have.
but I printed the one where Roger said he had edits.
Oh,
I just
may
want to,
not-
I want to make sure I have them. Let me see your front page so I can see whether I've got.
If you didn't
text.
track changes on it, it wouldn't show these like in this form.
Okay, I don't have this. I must have the original.
Did you? Okay, so you have the original. All right, so we'll just do it up on the board. Although it's hard.
Can we do the copy?
It doesn't have the comp. Yeah, would you mind, Mayor? Yeah, it'd be easier. I think people could look at it that way. Bert, let him have yours.
Quick copy.
Yeah. Let me try something else. I don't know why it's not pulling up the color on that. No, we can't get to the OneDrive here either.
Mine comes through as big print.
Yeah, okay. You set the printer a little bigger.
No, I just.
But
printed
I don't know
what
why
there was.
the color scheme doesn't work on this monitor for some reason. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now it does a little bit better.
Much better.
Okay, so you want to just take a gander at those? I mean, I liked what Roger's comments were pretty much across the board.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody else had any significant feelings one way or the other. But I think it just expanded on what we had in there to begin with. Yep. They added the piece that in consultation with GHD.
Yep. Keep scrolling.
Yeah. It talks to the administrative costs. Then how we got away from the meter size as our main delineator or main discriminator. Good, okay. And we went through the kind of the description on the how we were breaking out fixed versus non-fixed. And then here's where he talked about the administrative costs and what we were trying to pay for with the thanks, Mayor, with those administrative costs.
Okay, thanks.
And a great catch on the addition of the general fund support. It's in the spreadsheet and the workbook, but was not previously in the executive summary. And then, yeah, a nice catch by Bruce here this morning. We have the actual tables, titles inverted on the two tables. So the first one is the sewer table, and the second one is the water table.
I had one or two comments that I didn't send.
Okay.
On the utility working group methodology, I thought there was a good place to add some language toward the end of the first paragraph where we talk about committee's been focused on ensuring that customers that contribute greatly to the city's high water use and wastewater flow pay their fair share of water and wastewater operating and capital expenses. And we had also talked about at the beginning about not protecting any individual group or category.
Okay.
And then I didn't have any language, but a little farther down in that section where there's the heading about, in bolded heading about fixed costs. And it says most of the city's capital costs for water and wastewater are included. And then in the next section, some of the capital costs for water and wastewater are included in the non-fixed cost. And I thought it might be a good place to add a little language there that would address what I think are going to be expressed concerns by the public about reflecting, dealing with assigning peak costs.
Yeah, I think that maybe not in the executive summary, but maybe in the body of the report, it's going to have should have a lot more detail. I mean, I thought we'd have the, kind of the attachments of Mark's or Matt's report. We'll have the, the previous the asset management reports, those kind of things.
I would argue for putting a little bit more in there if there's some sentence or two or three that we can add.
Yeah, so provide us some thoughts on it, how you would like to put that in there. Yeah, it's easy to say, well, I add a little something.
Yeah.
Give me a little something to add, and then we'll share it with the group.
I will do that.
Thank you.
That's all I had.
And then Bert got his water bill for his resort in Bethany this morning, so we have another set of rates we can put into the table if we would like to. There was some discussion. Roger said recommended we take Georgetown out.
I'd like Georgetown in.
So what's the group thought on Georgetown, leaving it as a point of reference and add Bethany just as a point of reference?
Yeah.
Okay, so we will do that. I'll let that in there. Anything else as far as kind of the executive summary and where we want to go with that? Pretty good?
I think it's pretty good.
Okay, so again, the next, if you haven't spent some time looking at it, go back at it again with Roger's changes in there and see that if there's anything else we would want to put into that or take out of that, and then we'll get that prepped for record at some point in time here before the next meeting. So we'll hopefully have a hard copy of everything we're trying to go forward with at next week's meeting. Yes, sir. Yep.
On these sheets that you have, water comparison and sewer rates comparison.
Sure.
I know each one of these is 1-inch meter. Is that correct?
Correct. If I see which one you're looking at, that's the intra-city comparison? Yeah. Those are 1 inch across the board.
I would suggest the possibility of maybe putting that somewhere on the chart because obviously we do have 5 or 6 different meters and those aren't taken into consideration.
Okay. Yep.
Just to put more information on it.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, so then while we're on those, so we had in the front part of that workbook, obviously we had the kind of the comparison between the various local towns. I did not add, just so everyone knows, I did not add Ocean City's wastewater because I really couldn't really find. I mean, it really didn't have a really good comparison for me. Anyway, Bert, you had some insights on it because they bought it from Wycomico County or something. The rate, their sewer side did not really kind of make sense.
Yeah, well, I think the county used to own that facility, I understood, and then somebody updated me and said that Ocean City purchased it from Worcester County, so.
Okay, all right. So the stuff I could find online for Ocean City, like I said, just didn't, or no, I guess it wasn't online. I had an old, their 2015 or something, report they did. It didn't seem to make sense to me. So I added the water, but if it doesn't make sense to add it, we can take that off as well.
I guess one question that's just occurred to me is whether we know in the case of these comparison jurisdictions, kind of what the status of their facilities is. Are they upgraded to what they need to be? Are they primary, secondary, tertiary? Are they, just because that might indicate if there's a low or a high reflecting those costs.
I don't know the condition of each one's facility.
They do have a heavy outfall system compared to Ocean City.
Ocean City.
Okay, so that's on the comparison one. We're going to add Bethany water. And then on what we did on which was a fairly recent addition, we went through and did each of our meter sizes and then the impact to each of those various user groups. And then I tried to capture kind of the percent rate increase based, comparing 2018 to what our proposed rate is. Didn't know how useful that was to everybody as a means of comparison, but I have it on there. If we think it's a good thing to keep on there, we can, or if we think it's not, then we don't need to. But you can kind of see both for water and wastewater.
So that's these tabs?
Correct, right,
Okay.
the larger one. So, 1 inch meter, and then the table for 1.5 inches, a table for the 2, a table for the 3, and a table for the 4. And then a table on the sewer side for the 6. And maybe I've done 6 on the water side. And then the same kind of breakout for the water. So I thought those were wonderful ways to be able to compare. If the board wants to say, well, what does it look like for, whatever, we have a quick way of kind of getting to that. I'm being able to present that. Any comments on those, good, bad, or indifferent?
Very helpful.
Is the percentage thing helpful?
Yes.
Okay, we'll leave both of those. Okay. Okay, anything else for the kind of the executive summary document or those supporting tables that go with it?
These that you just handed out,
Yep.
do they need to say somewhere any assumption about the 75%, 25%, or is that?
No, because those aren't really based on we're not calculating an annual bill or a monthly bill for those.
Okay.
That's
okay.
just
Just
the
the rates.
number.
Right, okay.
And the
Gotcha.
one thing that we do need to point out, we talked last week that it really didn't kind of confuse the issue to show the unsurcharged kind of rate. So we're going to take that table out of the, I'll leave it in the workbook, but we'll take it out of that kind of the presentation mode. But the other thing that we missed is we need to make sure we annotate, the graph that we do show that it says it does include the surcharges factored in there. Because if you just look at a rate number in there, it doesn't agree with what's posted or what's on our website. But it does include the 50. So I made a comment on mine that I need to make sure we annotate that in the presentation. It shows that it's only that it does include the 50% surcharge, which we will not be carrying forward into our recommendation to the new rates.
And that just brings to mind a quick question.
Sure.
Where I was questioned about the current bill. This may not be anything we can answer today, but it was a question about the current bills and the rates that show on the current bills and whether that reflects what's being charged on that bill or not. It looked like it was showing the peak rate, but it was for a non-peak period. I can.
Say that again.
The current water and sewer bill that owners receive shows the 310 rate, which is the peak rate, as opposed to the 210 rate, which is the non-peak, but the bill is calculated on the 210.
Well, season.
Bert. That's a Bert question.
If I heard you right, you're saying, Bruce, that the bills are not calculated.
They're calculated correctly, but there's a misleading number on the current bills if people are trying to compare what their bills are charged on. Like the bill that the most recent bill would have been for the non-peak period, but it says the rate is the peak period rate.
Okay. I'll just have to get together with
Yeah, I'm
the billing person.
And I'm just thinking about when people are comparing what they're paying now to the figures that are here, that's gonna get them off on a wrong track when they're thinking that the rate is the 310 rate when it's the 210 rate. $2.10, $3.10.
Well, the peak rate would start April 1 and go through June 30th.
Right, but that's,
And we haven't sent those bills.
I know, but the bill that was for the non-peak rate said $3.10 rate. But it's multiplied out at the $2.10 rate.
So the language in the note was incorrect.
Right. And I wouldn't care, except somebody could get all confused about that when they're trying to understand what we're presenting.
I understand. Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay. And if you have any further question, I can identify who had the question.
Yeah, very good. Wonder if that was a monthly bill or a quarterly bill where that.
It was a quarterly.
Quarterly bill. At least we billed them correctly.
Yes.
All right, so next thing I'd like us to review, if we can get it to a point where we can see it, is kind of the format or the outline for what we want to take to the Board of Commissioners with our recommendations. So hopefully you've all seen kind of this with the intent, and please interject as we go through if we want to add something or take something out or just have an idea we want to talk about. So obviously first, just kind of some intro stuff, talk about our charter, who we were, how many times we met, that kind of thing. Kind of refresh with everybody's understanding for the water system and the wastewater system, because we do cover things, not specifically within the city footprint. Talk about where the rates have been, in recent history. Obviously talk about the large capital expenses we have and some of our debt paybacks that are starting to happen now. Kind of show everybody kind of condition, physical condition of some of our assets and why we need to invest in some of the projects and programs that we're trying to set into place in the work that are laid out in the workbook, that we got from the asset management plan. There's the debt we talked about. Then I'll talk about the methodology that, the kind of the group talked to, and I'm hoping that, maybe Mike or Roger or Bruce or somebody would be able to talk to that. I mean, you wrote up a nice little summary of that, so that would kind of be the desire. Just kind of get through the thought process, then kind of get into, the specific steps we took within the way Matt built the workbook and kind of set, the various steps along the way, starting with the cost allocation table, how we broke those costs out, both for the overall as well as for the administrative costs. Go to something with the rate, the rate setting objectives, that tab of the workbook where you could have all those configurable assets or variables that you could plug in depending upon what, so we could look at all the various options out there, the different options that we had, how we came to those. Have a snapshot or talk to the projects and expenses, both on, I guess, for the water and the wastewater side. Maybe tie in the revenue, projected revenues thought that a couple of the graphs that Matt has in the workbook would be good for this. You know, you show those bar graphs that show the differing lines of, you know, here's our costs, and then the other line would hear the revenues. We could talk to, you know, that gap and thus the need for the rate increases.
As long as the scale works.
Yeah, clearly, and I've made that on one of these guys. Man, it's got to be readable, right?
Yeah.
Definitely understand that, and that'll cause us some challenges, but I think it has to be. It has to be able to be seen.
And the trouble can be when the scale gets right to deal with the spread of the
Yeah,
lines.
that's
And then all of a sudden you lose, gee, what are these numbers? You know, what are the labels on the scale?
Right.
And do I care or not, because is this big dollars or small dollars?
Right, yeah. And all those, as we kind of start building this and start putting, you know, pictures into the PowerPoint or whatever we're going to use, we'll have to play and see how we can best display that. But just kind of the topics that we want to make sure that we're touching on as we go through it. Then talk to kind of 13, you know, the 13-year, started as a 13-year baseline, quickly turned to a 12 as we left 2019. But now the 12-year baseline time period, and showing and this is where I kind of didn't know how many different kind of things do we want to show. We want to talk to, you know, the variable level, the 1-year level, and then our recommended one, or just go straight to our recommended course of action, or what are kind of the thoughts there? Or think through it and we'll come back to it.
Yeah, that's maybe the toughest area,
Mhm.
because we want people to fully understand how we arrived at the 4.
Right.
But as you go through all the options, it ends up being a very long, involved, well, maybe that's the key, is not having it be long and involved, but somehow getting it to be salient enough that we can express why did we select 4. And it was, I mean, the bottom line was to eliminate the ever-increasing bumpiness
Right.
that occurs.
So as I was kind of pucking through it last night, I'm thinking, okay, if you looked at the kind of current situation, it shows, you know, we're however many millions below our expenses with our revenues, and then kind of flick to the variable one that shows, okay, this is what brings the rates up to the expenses, and then we looked at several options to smooth that out because nobody wanted a 1-year changing rate. And our recommendation, and then jump to the 4-year kind of term as the one that we've kind of settled on and talked to, you know, brings in that one start of the big peak, kind of levels it out. You know, the bad thing is it jacks the current rate, the first year of the proposed rate, higher than it would have otherwise needed to be.
Right, but it doesn't keep climbing every year.
Correct, it stays pretty one. And can talk to that. But I thought maybe the initial one with kind of current sit, second one is the variable where we're catching it each year, matching the lines, and then go to the third one that shows, here's our recommended.
That may be the
kind of
best,
balance.
the way you just described
Makes
it.
sense.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Because it's also important to make sure that people understand that because of what you were just saying about the smoothing, and it makes the proposed first-year rate higher than it would have been otherwise.
Right.
That explains why the proposed first-year rate, the smooth rate for 4 years, doesn't necessarily match what was kind of figured for the rate, for
Right.
the numbers for the interim.
Right.
Whereas if you did it with the variable every year, it would more closely match that.
Okay, great. And I'll try to talk those. And I think the graphs do a really good job of just kind of depicting that for you. And we didn't really have to get into too much of the numbers,
Right.
although we can if we need to. But I thought I would just kind of go with the graphs.
That first year being higher than it would need to be if we weren't leveling it. How fast does that get us up to the desired reserves? To the reserves?
I think we had the reserves at the 6-year mark. Didn't we do? And we're actually paying it out of.
I can't remember.
Kind of paying it out of
Are-
surcharge.
are
We
you-
can go in there in a little bit and look right in the workbook. I think we spread it
Are
at
you
6.
confusing two things?
The reserves that
Because
we were
we
building.
were pulling 250 from the reserves for each of 6 years, from the ones that were built up by the current structure. But then are you asking what gets
No,
us,
that wasn't my question.
right, that's what I thought.
But,
To build it, I think we have 100, in the sewer side, I think we have 150 a year over 6 years. At the end of the 6 years, we would have the $600,000 of reserves on the wastewater side.
well, and if those reserves get needed, is that going to lead to another rate increase within that 4-year period?
Not the intent, depends on, you know, what the emergency would be that would cause us to dip into the reserves.
Actually, what's very important to that question, and maybe it's something that we have to state when we're doing that. An assessment was made of essentially the probabilities. Now you can't, the unknown unknowns were complete disaster strikes. But this was based on a reasonable level, based on the expectation of what's going on during these next 4 years. And then you build up to that point. We could have some minor hits during that time frame, which is why the reserves are there. But there wasn't an expectation of something disastrously happening to the infrastructure based on the infrastructure normally aging out, as opposed to a disaster. So I think that addresses how we got there.
And then where Bruce was going, that the funds that have been built up by this surcharge,
Right.
which the bill says, I forgot exactly how it's
Sure.
worded on the bill, but I take that as take that seriously, that it will be used for wastewater treatment. not-
Absolutely is, and we can show you in the workbook where that's applied as a revenue that pays down. And then, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but how you characterized it. But it does pay down to help pay rates, for lack of a better term, but it is used in that wastewater.
But so it's not a
formula.
down payment on repaying debt.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
You are correct.
Is that considered?
As just paying off debt with that?
Yeah, well, to reduce the amount of debt,
Look, I think I can address that. We started the 50% surcharge originally to help cover a lot of these engineering costs that were occurring prior to even construction. And so, if you really say where'd the money really go, a lot of it covered those engineering.
Some's already been spent.
Yeah.
Upfront.
Oh, a
yeah.
lot has, yeah.
We spent, I don't want to throw a number out right now, but it was a significant amount of engineering before we even broke ground.
And I think you're right. I think it was $1.5 million that's left in that surcharge account. And I think in the formulation, it's $250K payback each year over the 6-year period. That gets to $1.5 million.
Yep.
Yeah. So good thought. Thank you.
If that were instead used to get us up to the reserves, what would the effect be on the level rate on a 4-year basis? I don't expect anybody to know that.
Yeah, say the question again. If instead of
instead of
spreading it over a period of time, if you dumped it all into the first year,
right,
it would significantly reduce the first year. But again,
but the leveling would.
Yeah, reduce the first year, and once you go to leveling, it would kind of disappear.
So if you spread it across, and I guess Matt's probably a better one to talk to, but if you spread that $1.5 million over just that first year term, it would obviously bring that
I'm
down,
not
but it would cause that second, step to, you'd lose $500,000 being applied to that. We're trying to mitigate that big jump in 4 years as well. So yeah, so definitely used in the formulation of the new rates, how it was plugged in was evenly spread over that 6-year period.
Okay, and because the second 4 years is 2 of the years that have it and 2 that don't.
Correct.
That's.
Although it's spread over that, that 4-year window. Yeah. To mitigate that spike a little bit.
So it also has an effect on the jump in the rate between years 4 and 5, from the first smooth batch to the second smooth batch.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back on that 12. I need to change that to 12 year. Although everywhere else we call it 13, but it became the 12-year baseline. What was I thinking here?
The multi-year baseline.
Yeah, that's a better line. Water, show grass, provide numbers, or create summer tails on the screen. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, which of the, is that water? Can you see? Yeah, water. So if we went to one of these ones, okay, see, this was option 4. If we went back, so we would show, and I thought I would just kind of pull the graphs out of it. There's kind of the current situation where we will be, shortfall. And if we went to the variable shows how we align each year, and then our preferred option of option 3, which was the 4-year. So those are kind of ones I thought I would just pull the graphs out of there and show those. then the same kind of deal with the wastewater, how we selected the 4-year term. Now we're into the kind of the meat. Okay, here's what we recommend. So a couple of questions. What do we want to show? I mean, do we want to show, these tables with the recommended numbers? Do we want to show it for the variable option as well? What do you think would be the most effective way? It isn't our recommendation kind of section. Just show the ones.
I kind of look to the mayor and say, how much do you want to see?
I don't think it's necessary.
Just to show the one? Okay, so we can show the one for water, one for sewer. And then I thought we'd go into the impacts and do as much of this or as little as this as the board wants to kind of get into. I mean, it's kind of all on the one sheet of paper, so we could pull it up if you want to see what it is against Lewis or Bethany now or Ocean City, we can.
That's good information.
Yeah.
I think the one inch needs to be.
Right, so in that case, I think we would pull. We'd pull something out of this table or have this table as a handout or certain screenshots if we just wanted to pull a couple out to compare. But that's got the first tab is the city stuff between the various cities based on our recommendation. And then water and sewer, and then there's the large one where we just compared each of the size of meters that we have and those percentage basis.
And when we show those, I think it's very helpful to use the yellow highlight to pick the 40,000
Okay, so yeah.
gallon
Yeah.
to
Right.
compare jurisdiction to jurisdiction for
Right.
kind of the,
The ones that we want to talk to.
whatever
highlight.
word, not average, but whatever the right word is to use. Just, they're all there, but highlight 40 in each one.
And maybe highlight the million also,
For the big users.
for the big, yeah.
So the other thing that
Both in the 1 inch and in the larger meters.
Right, because otherwise people get lost in too many figures.
yeah, well, the thing you have to be cautious about is, okay, one that jumped out to me when you start looking at the percentages, if you looked at the 4-inch meter and go, holy crap, they're getting a reduction of 40% at the 4,000 level. Okay, well, there is no 4-inch meter that's only doing 4,000. They're in the millions, every one of them. So there's somewhat of an irrelevant comparison just because of the way the table is set up.
Well, I was thinking for the 1 inch,
Yeah.
highlight the 40,000.
Yeah.
For the other ones, highlight something else if that seems
Right.
the way to go.
Yeah, so I mean, and we know what, our 6-inch user is one, and we know how much they use, and it's at the $6 million level, but I don't really have a comparison to make that to, because there's nothing that high on the other side.
That's a very good point in terms of the first proposition you talked about, where it's an irrelevant number because there is no such thing as a
Right.
small user with a larger size meter. And probably that shouldn't be in the chart, or somehow should be blanked out or not there, because if you have that size meter, you don't have that low flow, and therefore if someone's not thinking about that and they look at it and they go, holy crap, you're
Right.
giving away the store.
Right.
No, you're not. It doesn't even exist.
Right. So one thing I thought might be doable, I haven't really dug too much into it, was if you pull, like if you're looking at the 6-inch one, maybe you throw the 6 million gallons on there just because.
Right.
You don't have anything really to compare it. I guess you could compare it to last year in that, we were building them at a 4-inch meter kind of rate. We're saying now we want to step it up a little bit. So we could show that, but maybe just take these, because we know we don't have any of those, take them off the system. So you're only looking at relevant comparisons.
Right.
But that jumped out at me. You get that 4,000 gallon and you're looking at a 3 or 4 or 6-inch meter. It's like, oh man, they're really giving them a break, but there are none. Yeah. Okay.
So is it better for the different meter sizes to highlight kind of the more typical line and just
Yeah,
highlight that?
or maybe to the side somewhere, put the number of those that we have and maybe the range for each one. Or I'll think of a way to try to quantify that a little better so it's a more meaningful comparison.
Yeah, because you definitely want to provide them the most information and try, if we can, try to minimize upfront misleading
Right. Yeah.
interpretation.
In the 1.5 meters, there are some pretty small users.
There are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So-
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we can add that. So what do you think? That, I think, came to the end of what I was thinking we'd want to show. Anything else that would be good to kind of throw up for everybody?
My biggest thought on this is in the second page of this down toward the bottom, we talk about the peak and
The executive summary?
yeah. And really, if you think about it, what we've done is we've identified our fixed and non-fixed costs, combined everything into one rate, and we bill the people year-round with no seasonal. Really, if you really come down to it, that person who's here in what we would call the peak season is paying more because his volume is more, but he's paying the same rate that everybody else is paying. We've removed the other accelerator, the actual billing rate from that, and justifying that, I think it can be justified because I'm convinced that this is a fair system. But that's where I don't know whether we should address this or we should wait for discussion. It's hard to. Basically, somebody would say, okay, a person who's here during the peak season, assume he uses no water during the rest of the year. He's here only during the peak season. Under the old rate system, he had the peak rate times the higher volume that, his volume. And while we've averaged all this in the one rate, and you can, on the surface, you can say, well, gee, everybody's paying the same thing. That's fair. But some people, I think, we're going to have to be prepared for that criticism that they're saying, well, you've removed one component, the accelerator, the peak rate, and so it's kind of like we had it on steroids before, and now we're taking the steroids out of it. But I haven't come up. It's just the way it is. It's my explanation. I don't really have a better way to explain it. That we really haven't shifted more of the burden toward the seasonal user with this methodology. By the same token, we're going to argue, well, you use what you pay for what you use.
Well, we have shifted the burden to the bigger users because you're paying for every gallon you use. So whether that's a bigger user in the spring or a bigger user in the fall or in the dead of winter, the bigger users are going to pay more because they're using more.
Well, and I agree with that, and they would have paid more before because they were using more. The only thing of it is, like I keep using the term steroid, we took the steroid out of there because we don't have a peak rate. Now, I'm throwing arguments on both sides.
Sure.
Another view is, as I think you might have mentioned, Kevin, a lot of places have done away with peak and non-peak. They've gone to, like Bethany uses a tiered billing system, but they don't have any peak or non-peak.
I think that's the going back a few months ago before I sort of fell apart, was addressing that issue. And one of the things that most jurisdictions, they've gone to the inclining block, which seems to be, quote, the trend. The trends continue until they don't, is the infrastructure that you have employed and has been this constant dynamic of, and some people had mentioned it last time in the audience, going back a few months. Well, the infrastructure we have wouldn't be as big if we didn't have the peak that we have. And therefore, if you're a year-round resident and you're not part of that influx, why am I paying for the infrastructure that was needed for, quote, that peak? And that was the thing I tried to address, which I didn't do a very good job, unfortunately, is the fact that, for example, like the ocean outfall. Even if we didn't have an ocean outfall, we had to put in an ocean outfall because of the choice between alternatives. And then when you elect to do that, you don't put an ocean outfall in and says, yeah, that meets our needs for the next year. You put it in for the next 50 or 60 years. When you do that with 50 or 60 years, you have to say, okay, how are things going to evolve over the next 50, 60 years? And you try to put your best planning hat on. And then the second part of that is when you're installing something like that, it makes sense economically to make it bigger rather than smaller, because it doesn't cost that much more for the incremental cost of once you're digging the hole and putting the pipe in. So you don't undersize it, you make it bigger.
Well, I think you nailed it, Mike, in what you said. In a sense, I think that's probably the best explanation. And that what you're really saying is we looked at the increment, we looked at the peak and the non-peak, and then identified the variable costs that occur. And really our conclusion was those variable costs were not really as high as anticipated, and we didn't feel that really justified a peak rate, because the incremental costs that were being added by these, you know, what some people call the tourists, part-time users, weren't really there. So we were kind of adding a charge to recover an additional cost, which really wasn't as much as
And
the
that,
rate that was applied to it.
and that all gets back to this definition a little higher up on the page of fixed and non-fixed, where most of the fixed costs are from the capital expenses. And the capital expenses are mostly fixed for the system, and they're not variable to take care of that peak. And so that's where the explanation is, and that's what's hard for people who don't understand that to believe.
Well, I think you guys both did a good job explaining that concept. I buy it completely, because we were, in our rate billing system before, we were assuming that there was a much bigger burden brought on by the non-seasonal user, much more than what we could quantify.
And the good example is the outfall, where the bulk of the cost is the labor and the setup and the on-site work to do it. The size of the pipe is just a small incremental cost. It's
Right.
not driving the cost.
There's a secondary benefit from the scale of our infrastructure. And we talked about it briefly. If you go back a long time, especially for coastal towns, they used to do only primary treatment, which basically meant you filtered the big chunks and you let it rip. And that's the bottom line. But as time went on, you couldn't do that. And right, am I right, Dennis?
We don't like to think about
Well, that's what primary is.
it. As kids, what we were swimming in.
Well, hey, but luckily, the very nature of salt water is what helped make up for the lack of consideration of what we were doing as a society. I started out working in a sewer, so I can speak to that. It gives you a sense of humility and great respect. But anyway, we then both on our water side and our sewer side, we started to move up in our processing. We have, for example, in Rehoboth, we're privileged to have really terrific water, and that's a good thing. And on the sewer side, we have dramatically improved what we do and how we do it. And that infrastructure does in fact cost a lot of money. And the influx that we have, which means, and we have businesses here, and I don't want to get into the issue of whether or not taxes should be higher for business or whatever, but the point is there's a good correlation between water usage and other services that are provided within the city. So I think I made that one comment where, you know, we have the benefit of the infrastructure related to wastewater and water that is helped by virtue of having that influx of visitors that we get the benefit of in terms of the infrastructure we have and the quality of the infrastructure. Now, we also suffer, if you will, from the influx of visitors in other ways, trash, whatever, etc. But this provides a much fairer balance, so those who use more pay more, which is the most equitable, I think, in my humble opinion, in terms of resources that you do. So if you use a lot of the resource, you pay for the resource. And if you really wanted to get carried away, water's a limited resource. So if you're using a lot of it, you should pay more for it. Same thing for the sewer. I mean, unfortunately, there's unlimited effluent, but it's a very important resource in the long run. And so we have to spend the money to process it in a way that it doesn't degrade our environment. And we selected the least of two bad options, either land application or what we're doing with putting it into the ocean. As an engineer, we selected the least worst of two options we had available to us, because I'm sure nobody in town wants to go to composting commodes.
And just as an example
I
of
got carried away, I'm sorry.
how people make assumptions about where the costs are in doing all this with the capital costs, I can relate it back to what people deal with in their own lives. I was explaining to somebody this morning, when you're thinking about redoing your roof, the cost of redoing the roof, the bulk of it is in the labor and in all of the ancillary pieces that go with it. The actual life of the shingle, whether you do a 20-year shingle, a 25-year shingle, or a lifetime 50-year shingle, is peanuts in the whole project. So you go for the long term and delete that, gee, we have to do the roof again in 25 years by going to the long life shingle, which only increased the cost of your project by a couple %.
Especially if you can throw it in your mortgage. Right? A couple pennies a month instead of 20 grand.
And if the,
20 grand in one pop.
And if the bank will give you a
Yeah.
long-term loan at 0% interest.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I would just ask, over the next, our next meeting is the 6th at 1:30, so next, I think Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'll be in Pennsylvania.
So review the documents, mark them up, send any kind of highlights you have. Just know that Roger and Deb aren't here today, so they're going to have major briefing roles when we go to the board. Yeah, you better be here to defend your honor at the next meeting. So it's the 6th. Sharon, do you know the schedule with the working group and then the board meeting? You know the dates and times for those?
Yes, the meeting with the commissioners will be Wednesday, June 12th at 10 a.m.
And that's a special meeting?
It's a special meeting.
Then we go to the board the following Friday?
Well, depending on any other comment or assignment, if you will.
Sure. And I would expect we will get some. They'll say, hey, can
Yes.
you show me what it does to X, Y, or Z? Then we would be able to do that in that interim period, still take it to the board meeting on whatever.
It'll be the regular meeting on the
21st.
21st, but
It's
yeah,
20,
we'll have to see what.
21st?
We'll tentatively put it on there, but we'll have to see, if it's timely.
sure. That's the 21st at 3.
21st at 3.
So in a perfect world, we go to the 12th at 10 and then come back on the 21st at 3. And I think virtually everybody on the committee had.
And the hope is to
said
get
they were
it,
available.
to have a vote on the 21st, so the rates can go into effect July 1.
Okay, and the last thing on my list is we're trying to get caught up on the administration side of the house. So we've sent over the last week, probably sent the remainder of all the minutes that need to be reviewed and approved. Please take a look at those. Give me any comments you have. I think Ann is putting them on the agenda for next Thursday to get us caught up through today. I don't know whether we'll get today's cranked out in time to approve at the same time, but hopefully we will. But I think if there's any still outstanding, there's one. So, but I think most of them are out. So please take a look and we'll get it.
And you said the 6th meeting starts at 1:30?
Yes.
Yeah, Kevin, I was a little slow punching my calendar here. Those dates for the next meeting are, can you repeat that?
June 6th.
June, D-Day, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's at 10?
I will.
1:30.
Thank you very much.
Okay, then on the 21st is the presentation.
3 o'clock, yeah. We have an interim working group on a special meeting on the 12th. Any other comments from the table? Mike, Bruce, or Bert? Comments from the audience? Anybody got anything for the good of the group? No? Okay. Matt, anything on your end? Lost them. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.